Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Let's talk cheer.
My name is Kolbe.
My name is Jayla, and today we are going to be talking about an experiment we created over the weekend in school.
Recently in school, we finished reading The Sports Gene by David Epstein, and we are now creating and performing our own experiments that are related to our sports. The experiment we chose for our project is on jumps. In cheerleading, there are so many athletes who are amazing at jumps, and we were wondering if stretching would have an effect on the height of an athlete's toe touch. We think that stretching will have an effect on the height because if your flexibility level is changed, then the height in your jump will change because flexibility will affect the height of a jump.
If you didn't know, a jump in cheerleading is when you jump high in the air and try to get your legs in a split. In the book The Sports Gene, Chapter 5, The Talent of Trainability, the chapter talks about how scientists conducted a study to figure out if athletes were good at their sports because of genetic inheritance or because of training. The scientists were able to conduct a study that showed how much people's aerobic capacities increased.
When reading Chapter 5, I came across a quote that stated, "In the 1900s, Butchert had put a group of 30 very sedentary subjects through identical training plans to see how much their aerobic capacities would increase." Epstein, page 81. After reading this in Chapter 5, we wanted to relate our experiment to something similar. So instead of seeing how much aerobic capacity would increase, we wanted to see how much an athlete's height in their jump would increase.
After testing this, we found out that some participants were able to quickly improve flexibility with stretching, resulting in dramatic increase in jump height. Our experiment also relates to the book in Chapter 2, when it talks about the tale of two high jumpers. This chapter talks about how, in order to improve your sport, you have to practice. Just like our experiment tests. When you do a jump, after you've practiced stretching, your jump improves. Before we set everything up for the experiment, we looked around for a spot where we could conduct it. We had our station set up in the gym near a corner where there was space to film and jump.
For our experiment, we used a cheer mat, tape, and a tripod. While we were setting up the station, we took the tape and a yardstick and measured the wall. When we were measuring the wall, we put a piece of tape on the wall for every 10 inches so we could record the height of a person's jump.
While Kolbe set up the tape, I set up the tripod. I put the tripod at a certain angle so that the phone could record each person's height and their toe touch. Before we proceeded with our experiment, we went to another gym and grabbed a cheer mat to roll out on the floor in front of the tape on the wall.
After we finished setting up, we made sure to do a test run by performing a toe touch to make sure we weren't missing anything and to make sure everything was in place before we conducted our experiment.
When we were ready, we had 15 people test our experiment, including ourselves. There were 9 boys and 6 girls. We recorded each person's first toe touch and recorded the height.
After each person finished with their first jump, we had them do a good stretch, especially in the hips and legs. Some of the stretches included touching your toes, lunges, pigeon stretch, seated forward bend, butterfly, and head to knee.
When everyone was done with stretching, we had them perform another toe touch so we could collect the difference in height for our experiment.
After everyone had done the second toe touch, we recorded the difference in height and thanked everyone for doing our experiment.
The purpose of our experiment was to see if stretching affected the height of an athlete's jump. And after the experiment, we found out that it did. After we collected our data, we took all of the boys and girls and counted how many of them improved in height. We found out that 11 out of 15 athletes' jumps had increased in height from stretching. Lastly, we took the fraction and changed it into a percent to see how much the height increased as an overall.
This was a huge improvement in just what we were hoping for. We also did some math with just the boys and girls. For the boys, 7 out of 9 boys' height improved. This means that the boys' height improved by 77.78%. As well for the girls, all of the 6 girls' height increased. The boys' height average was about 47.3 inches for the first jump. After stretching, the boys' average was now 53.5 inches for the second jump. As well for the girls' height average was about 53.3 inches for the first toe touch, but after stretching, the average was now 63.5 inches for the second toe touch.
We were able to calculate the averages by adding the height of the first jump and dividing it by the number of people. We also did this with the second toe touch. We thought that stretching would affect the height of a person's jump because if your flexibility levels changed, then the height in your jump will change as well, because flexibility determines how high your jump will get.
After conducting our experiment, we found out that this is indeed true.
Before we finalized our experiment, there were many limitations that limited us from our original experiment. For example, some of the limitations were area, people, and safety cautions.
One of the major limitations was safety cautions. Our original experiment was going to go over if shoes had an effect on the height of a basket toss, but because you had to have experience for a basket toss and because you could easily get injured, we had to change our experiment.
Another limitation was the number of people willing to do our experiment. Since there were so many experiments going on at the same time, it was really difficult to find people who were already busy doing someone else's experiment.
The last limitation was area. Again, because there were so many people doing experiments, it was not easy to find an open area where someone wasn't conducting their experiment. Even though there were many limitations, it didn't stop us from doing our experiment. Some ways we improved our experiment was by changing it and finding some things to do that were safe. According to ActiveKids.com, there was a 42 to 60% chance of getting injured in a basket toss. Also, our teachers were very concerned that if we did a basket toss, someone could get seriously injured. Despite the safety cautions, we were able to change our experiment and make it into something that was safe for everyone to do. We were also patient with people and were able to get 15 people to do our experiment. We also ended up finding a space to do our experiment in the end. Although there were many limitations, we accepted the circumstances given and found ways to work around them.
In conclusion, stretching does affect the height of a toe touch. After collecting data from our experiment, we found out that our hypothesis was true. We questioned if stretching affected the height of a toe touch.
Like we stated before, we thought that if your flexibility levels change, then the height of your jump will change because flexibility will affect the height of a jump.
This held true in our experiment. About 73.3% of our test subjects improved their jumps after stretching. The boys' jumps increased by 77.78%, as well as the girls' all of their jumps increased by 100%. Despite the multiple limitations and challenges we faced, our experiment was still successful and we ended up finding a solution.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you have a great rest of your day.